Hello, and welcome to another episode of
the Super Data Brothers Super Data Show.
That's right. I am Ryan.
And I am Eric.
And we are two real-life brothers who work in the data and analytics industry. And have we got a good one for you today?
I think we do. All right, Ryan, I'm so excited for today's show because, we have Robert Yi coming on, CPO at Hyperquery, and we're talking about what I think is a really interesting subject, among other things, which is BI and UI. We're using all these BI tools, but sometimes the UI is trash. Sometimes the UI looks good, but is actually trash. Sometimes the UI looks bad and is actually good. What makes good BI UI? I guess we're here to find out.
That's right. That's right. And so before we bring Robert on, a couple things we're going to cover. The first one, of course, is this is a live show, and it is more fun for us and it is more fun for you if you get your comments and reactions into the chat. We are watching it live. If you're a regular viewer here, you know that if you ask a good question, it is going to get passed through to our guests. So second thing is let us know where you're watching from. We always like to see people from all over the world watching the Super Data Show. And so...
even though it's mostly Germany. No,
we do have a big audience in Germany. It's funny. All right, so a couple of points of order before we bring Robert on. The first one, of course, is Meet the Super Data Brothers. So events that one or both of us will be attending coming up. DBT Coalesce, October 16th through 19th. As many of you know, I am the VP of Product Strategy at Good Data, and Good Data is sponsoring Coalesce this year, and so I will be there at the booth. I'm doing a presentation with one of our senior engineers, Jacek, and so you can catch me there. I'm going to bring some of the coveted Super Data Brothers T-shirts for you if you manage to track me down. So looking forward to meeting you at Coalesce. If you've never been to Coalesce, awesome event. Very different vibe from like a Snowflake Summit or something like that. Well worth attending if you're a data engineer, analytics engineer, or looking to make a move in that direction in your career. The second event that Eric and I will both be at is, of course, Data Day Texas. Data Day Texas is one of the coolest data conferences I have ever been to. Probably is the coolest. It's one day, practitioner focused. No vendor BS. There's going to be a new analytics track this year that we have been asked to organize. And so we'll be putting that together to get you skilled up and give you all sorts of cool perspectives on BI analytics and data in general. If you do want to attend Data Day Texas, when you register, use the code Super Data Brothers, all one word, to get I think it's a 20% discount on your registration. So check that out, January 27th, 2024. We will be there. Okay. And before we bring Robert on, one more thing, a quick word from our sponsor, Symphony Analytics. So a huge shout out to Symphony and their support of the Super Data Brothers show. Our very first sponsor. We've been really excited to work with them. And really, Symphony solves a couple big problems that a lot of the people I've worked with over the years have. The first one is BI tool sprawl. You have too many BI tools. People have to go to too many places to find their answers. And Symphony makes it easy to bring assets from Tableau and Power BI into one place where you can find and communicate about, you can find data and collaborate over that data. But it goes beyond just like, oh, here's a portal where you can see chart A and chart B in one place, right? There are lots of tools that do that. What sets Symphony apart is their focus on giving you conversational and collaborative storytelling tools within that interface. So you can bring assets together and then have a conversation about them, assemble them into a presentation so that your end users don't have to go into 2 or 3 or 4 BI environments in order to figure out what's going on in your company, and to really increase the time, or decrease rather, the time to value for your analytics by using these collaborative features. So symphonyanalytics.io, we're big fans. Go check them out. And once again, thank you to them for sponsoring the show. So any last words before we bring Robert on, Eric?
No, just a few shout outs. Hey, Tom, Chicago as usual.
Yeah.
Austin, Texas. We got Belgium, Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. And will there be Super Data Brothers T-shirts at Data Day Texas? Absolutely.
Oh, so, you know it.
We're going to put in a big order, and
especially if we're the ones organizing it, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we got to have the shirts. So so do say hi at both of those conferences to try to snag your shirts. Now, I won't. They're going to be in limited supply, right? So you know, it's a snooze you lose sort of situation with the T-shirts. When I run out, I run out, and I apologize in advance if you track me down and we're out of shirts at that point. It is what it is. I can only carry so many shirts on a flight. Okay. Newfoundland, Canada. We have a decent Canadian contingent who watches us because of our Cognos connection. All right, let's bring Robert on and get started. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Hello, welcome.
Hey everybody. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, it's excited. We're really excited to have you. I feel like like we've been trying to get you on the show for a while, and finally we were able to do it. So it's really good to have you here. So today's topic, you're CPO at Hyperquery, and we'll get into what Hyperquery is and the cool stuff that you guys are doing. But before we do, why don't you just kind of give everybody a background on who you are and your story of how you got to where you are in the data world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a career data person. So I started my path in data, I suppose, as a physicist. So I studied physics in undergrad and then went to grad school for more physics. And then I, at the time, we didn't really have Python or really great tools. I mean, we had Python, but it was just so rudimentary that I was using MATLAB and I was exploring 100 gigabyte data sets with that. And I started my career like I cut my teeth basically like analyzing river data. So at MIT, I did the thing that PhDs usually do after they graduate, which is like I went and became a data scientist. So I worked at Wayfair where I built some machine learning models, and then I went to Airbnb where I did more generalist work. So I worked on a bit of product analytics, which was very relevant to what I'm doing at Hyperquery. Also some machine learning, also some causal inference, and lots of fun stories there. Now I'm the chief product officer of Hyperquery. I felt like the analytics job was fun in some ways, but also extremely painful in other ways. And I felt like a tool, better tooling could help ease some of that pain. So yeah, and now I'm here. That's
really interesting. It's not uncommon that when we interview someone on the show that they kind of follow that same like physics to data science to and then kind of branched out from data science
we've
into
had
other areas
follow
of data.
That like basically exact path. Like I was a physicist, I graduated, got into data science, and now here I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it's a common pattern because a lot of physicists, for physics, at least for me, it came alive not because of like the theoretical aspects of the physics, but because you could see it happen in the real world. And data work is kind of just divorcing like that component from like the full like stack of like doing the work and like doing the theory, and then you get to just basically see things come alive every day, right? I think it's a very natural course of career trajectory, I suppose.
Yeah, that's kind of what attracted me to data too. I mean, I come from I majored in playwriting, so it's very different, very different origin point. But it was kind of the ability. It felt like when it came to, I was studying IT, and this was an area where you could feel your impact in a very like human way, right? Versus if you go into
that's right.
networking or something like that, like the packets show up more often than they used to, but it doesn't have that kind of human impact, and that's what that's what makes it so cool. So one of the reasons so the hyperquery story, you decided at some point, and I'm always curious when I talk to someone who's kind of on a founding team, like first, what is hyperquery, and then maybe what was the genesis of it, as far as the tooling, like what was the inspiration?
Yeah, great question. So hyperquery, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a data notebook. So a lot of people like to think of us as sort of a mix between Notion and Jupyter and your SQL IDE. So we provide a really ergonomic workspace for you to do analytics work. Think of like, I suppose that's the best analogy that people tend to resonate with. But genesis for this product was essentially, at Airbnb, I got exposed to a bit of product work. Having come from like the science research world and then moved into the ML world, moving into the analytics world was just this huge like mindset shift. Like it was just a very different job, because I suddenly had this like stakeholders breathing down my neck all the time, right? And I realized like there were so many things great about the job, and that like I still got to do like interesting technical work, but then there were some things that were just horrendous about the job, especially during times of extreme like stress, when like your stakeholders are trying to make these game-changing decisions about trends in the industry, or because like COVID happens or something like that, and suddenly you're treated as sort of a second-class citizen. You're pushed to just pull SQL queries, get data, and then like send it back as quickly as possible. So for us, I felt this problem super viscerally, and I'll share a story here, but I actually got pulled on a team when I was at Airbnb. So I was, again, as I mentioned, I was doing generalist work, but then I got pulled onto this team very, very fortuitously, I suppose, for our company, in which we were trying to spin up a new startup within a startup, which is always, by the way, a terrible idea. Like, never join one of those within a big company. But it reported directly to Brian Chesky, which meant that I suddenly had this flood of like directors of PM all the way up to Brian asking me for data support. And obviously, they were like, oh, what's the team composition here? What do you think we need on this team? They had a bunch of PMs, they had a few designers, they had a couple researchers, they had like 4 or 5 engineers, and they had like obviously one person helping support all of the like data work. So I just had, suddenly like 20 stakeholders, and one of them included the CEO of the company, which just led to this nightmare of, oh my God, I'm writing SQL like 12 hours a day nonstop. I have no chance to turn this into any sort of narrative. I'm just exhausted, and I feel like there's got to be a better way for us to insert ourselves into this conversation. Over time, I think during that experience, I learned to just make docs. So I started making Google Docs that documented some of the work that I was doing, and I realized that even that like small step helped a ton, right? Like suddenly, it wasn't just like a PM is going to take the number and then share it with Brian and then have a discussion without me. It was suddenly like, oh, this is a really interesting insight that you had. Let's like bring Robert into the room and let's talk about it. And then suddenly my job got substantially, I mean, on the one hand, better, like more endurable for me, but then on the other hand, significantly more impactful, I suppose. Yeah. So
yeah. And so then that's interesting, like the Google Docs. And so some of our audience, it's interesting. Some of the people who watch this, we have this mix of like startup and then these real enterprise people who've like been doing enterprise BI and analytics for 20 years, right? And so I think a lot of people are familiar. Part of the audience will be very familiar with Jupyter and the concept of notebooks in general, but for the rest of the audience, like, can you kind of describe, what what is an analytics notebook, and what sort of things do you use it for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I suppose we could start with uh, like the difference between. So I suppose the world has been segmented traditionally into like basically like things like Tableau and workflows that fall into that, and then things that fall into the Jupyter notebook. It's a bit of a like problematic division in my opinion, because like I think we just sort of followed the tools that were available to us and then aligned accordingly. But yeah, so for people who aren't familiar with these tools, obviously like um, BI tools, you know, you have a SQL ID within them. Usually you have the ability to create queries, you have the ability to create visualizations, you usually have some sort of no code lever so you can create these. You can self-serve a little bit. Often these tools have like a rudimentary semantic layer beneath them, so you can like harden some of your work as code. And then that covers for, especially for startups and for companies of small scale, that covers most of your needs, right? Like I think something that I've learned over the last few years is rarely in startup world do you make data-driven decisions, right? If you're doing data-driven decisions as like an early stage founder, you're probably not doing things correctly. That's not to say that we don't use data. It's just that there's so much qualitative data to ingest that the amount of the involvement that, say, a very nuanced analysis might have within a decision-making process is usually quite small. So for smaller stage startups, for all the way up to, I don't know, whatever point that you usually until you're about like 50 to 100 people, primarily you'll work with dashboards, right? With BI. So you just need to surface core metrics. You need to expose that so that way you have something to tell your board, you have something to tell your investors, you have something to report financially, whatever. Then beyond that, though, a lot of teams start to do like a lot of custom questions start to come in, right? So you might get, whereas before you might be fine with just a rudimentary, like here's my funnel, here are my funnel metrics, here's what conversion rates look like at each step of our products. You might start getting questions like, oh, but what if you were to cut this between like Android and, or like mobile and web, or like are mobile users happier? And then like ambiguous questions like that, obviously there's like great value to them if you can answer them, but they're a lot more difficult to answer through a simple dashboard. You can try your best, and people can get really good at things like Power BI or Tableau and learn to cut things extremely well. But this sort of thing is much more ergonomic in, say, plain SQL, right? Now, obviously, this still keeps you within the realm of BI tools, and I think that's fine. You can still use the SQL ID within a BI tool and be perfectly happy. But as you continue to scale more and more, the insights required to deliver incremental value start to get more and more nuanced, right? And then a tool like a Jupyter notebook, where you might need Python or some full-fledged programming language that extends the capabilities of like bare bones SQL, would be warranted, right? You can do much more fancy, complex things that can like really eke out those little results. And obviously, like so as an example, like at Airbnb, some of the like custom analyses I did would drive like 0.5% lift against like our host's conversion rate, right? And that seems tiny, especially if you're like in the beginning stages of a company. You're looking for like 10x lift, right?
Right.
2x lift. 0.5% lift is a huge waste of time. But like at the scale of like $1 billion company, you know, 0.5 percent lift is like millions of dollars, right? So
Yeah.
it's still worth investing into. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think some people have said that there's some audio issues on my end, so I hope I fixed them.
Yeah,
let me
you're
know.
good now.
Oh, yeah, it
Are they
sounds
good?
now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I like 3 minutes before we went live, my personal laptop like just wouldn't turn on, and so I had to like plug all my Elgato stuff into my work laptop, and I don't have any of the software installed, and so there's weirdness, technical weirdness on my end. I apologize that it affected the stream, but no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, so I guess one of my questions is like, you mentioned the dashboards, and I feel, and we talk about this on the show a lot, that there's this over reliance. Like dashboards are almost the default communication method that everybody reaches to. Like, oh, some question came into the data team. Let's build them a dashboard. And it's not all the data team's fault. I mean, it's a well-trod path, and users ask for it. Like they will come to you and say, hey, I need a dashboard that does blank, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you see that? Are you starting to see some recognition that maybe that's not always the best way to present findings, not just on data teams, but are you starting to see some shift in terms of our audiences? Like, are they starting to get accustomed to some of these alternative data presentation methods?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think so. At least I live in a very insular bubble, right? Like I work with customers who use Hyperquery, so I'm obviously
Sure,
really biased.
yeah, they're all about it.
Exactly, they're all about it. So I think there's like two answers to this. Like one, yes, I absolutely see people moving from and I try to like propagate this message a lot, right? I'm like, you should be moving to an analysis first world rather than a dashboard first world by default. Like outside of a few core metrics that you need to observe daily, you shouldn't be making dashboards to answer every question. It's like first of all, like your core metrics will get lost and people will never be able to find those, which are actually the key drivers for your business. But then secondly, like a dashboard just isn't like a great way to display narrative information, right? Whereas like a page would be, or notebook would be. But I definitely, I think I try to post every so often on LinkedIn. I'm not super active, but of the posts that I've had, I've posted things like, you shouldn't be sharing dashboards by default. It indicates that like raw data is your primary value add rather than like narrative insight generation, and that sort of stuff like explodes. Like a lot of people seem to be resonating with that. I'd say like the second part of my answer to this question would be, I'm sure you guys have been following some of this stuff, but there's all this like semantic layer work that's a little bit nebulous still, but I think it reflects the like fact that people are, I think as like a hive mind, we're sort of moving towards like accepting some sort of semantic layer indicates that I think a lot of people see the need for a different infrastructure to be like underlying dashboards. It's almost like we sort of naturally aligned ourselves with the shape of the tools that were provided for us by like open source or by SaaS vendors. But now we're realizing, look, dashboards should first of all always be like underpinned by code. Otherwise, like you end up with all these. I mean, I think we've all been through this, but you go to your CEO and the CEO is like, why is this metric down? And you're like, oh, well, because I made this dashboard like four months ago and I don't maintain this, but you're looking at it. So I guess I'm going to take a look. And then it's this like massive like query with like 5 nested subqueries. And you're just like, don't use this. I'm just going to do this again for you. But that like workflow is just wrong, right? Like you shouldn't have to do that. You should have like a hardened definition of like, okay, like Mr. CEO, you should only be looking at like active users, right? And this is our definition for active. This is what everybody in the company agrees on is active. And you can trust that this has no like data quality issues. Like we monitor it every day. We run like 50 checks against it, et cetera, et cetera. But all this is just to say, I think, yes, like behaviorally, I think people are starting to accept that, yeah, we need to move a little bit more toward a narrative format. But then industry-wide, within like the, Twitter sphere, like LinkedIn sphere, there seems to be movement towards some sort of like refactoring of the space.
Yeah. I mean, I see that like it's been very interesting to see the return of the semantic layer to our conversation, because when I started my career in 2010, I was on a Cognos team, and like building the semantic layer was a mandatory step to creating anything. Right. Yeah. And we didn't call it a semantic layer back then, like probably, but that's what it was. And of course it did provide exactly the experience you're talking about, which is like,
that's right.
These you can combine, there's this walled garden of metrics, and you can combine any of them in any way. And we know that the answer you get will be correct. Right.
Yeah.
And it was really good for that. The flip side was adding anything to it was very onerous, both because we're in a different era of technology. Like the idea of managing things as code was not what you did back then. In fact, we were maybe into the peak of the we don't want code, we want UI wave at that point. And also it's just the practices. We were kind of living in a pre-agile, very waterfall focused world back then, where I started at a place. I worked there for 4 years, and when I left, there were requests to make changes to our semantic layer that were still in our ticket catalog from the day I started.
Oh, geez.
And if you went to them and said, "Hey, do you still need this?" The answer from the business was, "Yeah, that would be really helpful." And they've been waiting like my entire 4-year tenure at that company. So I do think it's been interesting to see the kind of concepts like the semantic layer come back. But my hope is that we have a kind of a more modern way to do it that will prevent some of the pitfalls that we experienced last time. Back when we used to build them all the time.
Yeah, but what we ended up doing was just creating multiple semantic layers, right?
Yes.
Like sometimes if you couldn't, you create a one-off mini semantic layer for like 2 or 3 reports, and then you end up with 4 semantic layers for 4 departments, and you're kind of in almost a similar situation to what we're in now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. So one of the things, it sounds like notebooks, there's kind of, the first thing that they're designed for is it sounds like, kind of analytical problem solving, right? And so is it fair to say that, like, if you look at the suite of tools that are available to you, is it fair to say the first or the most obvious reason to add a notebook would be for those situations where you're answering more speculative or kind of high value questions that are coming into a data team that you want to be able to kind of do a deep dive analysis and then show your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way we like to think of it is it's either, I suppose, observability or exploration. Like that's how you like rift most data work. And then on the dashboard side, you get a lot of the observability stuff, right? You need metrics of observability. You need, but then on the notebooking side, all exploration, so it's a little bit broader, maybe not even just like deep questions, not necessarily impactful or anything like that, just questions. I suppose, but that's also. I'm like trying to subsume a little bit way too much of the dashboard work probably with that. Like there's definitely questions that are appropriate within a dashboard.
Sure. Yeah. And I feel like those tend to be, it's the operational thing, right? Like, okay, we have these metrics. We agreed on what metrics we want to observe. We've agreed on what to do about it. Yeah. And now we need like a touchstone for everyone who needs to be involved to look at, and we can look at the dashboard and we understand what it means and we understand what actions we might want to take based on it. Then a dashboard's really great. But when you're kind of, when things are a little before that stage, I feel like that almost a notebook can help you figure out what needs to go on a dashboard in some sense.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think in like dashboards are kind of, I feel like they should be treated like productionized things, right? Like you have this thing that by the nature of how it's been constructed is constantly refreshing. It's always like, it's always fresh too. So it's like you look at it and you expect the latest data. It's interactive. It's basically like an application for your stakeholders that you've built, right? And yeah, if you know for certain that you're supposed to build a dashboard, and you know what the metric is that you're supposed to put on that dashboard, you know precisely what the dimensional cuts that you want to expose are. Yeah, start with the dashboard tool. But other than that, like sometimes, when I'll build dashboards, it'll be for something like a little bit arcane, right? It'll be like, oh, I want you to do, like even if it was say like a cohort analysis, right? I want to like gate these things according to like when people started using the product or like started had a certain event get triggered. Then like you might not have that metric available, so you would want to do some sort of like you would need to write a bunch of SQL. You would need to run a bunch of tests against that SQL. You would need to explore some of that to see if this is even like a viable way of looking at the data. And that all makes sense in a notebook, right? You want to go through this iterative process. You want to run checks. You want to document it all. So that way, if anyone asks you, you can be like, yeah, of course I checked that, like, this is not a null, like, or a zero, like zero value table or something, right? So yeah, agreed.
So then the notebook experience really comes out of, like, I first became familiar with them as through Jupyter, right? And so the idea, I think, is familiar, comfortable to people with a data science background.
Yeah.
Do you feel that people who are coming from more of that BI dashboard building background, like, what are they able to pick it up quickly, or do you have any advice for someone who's notebook curious, like how to change your thinking to embrace the notebook way of working?
Yeah, that's right. That's a so I mean, you used to work at Count, right? So like you understand like this,
Oh,
like
yeah.
this like rift, and I think there was a period where a lot of us were trying to bridge that gap. Um, I mean, I obviously, like, the like vendor answer would be for me to say, like, you should use Hyperquery, like we make it a little bit lower friction. But yeah, I think it's tough because Jupyter notebooks inherently are, I think, a little bit scary, especially if you're used to the SQL world or you're used to the IDE world. I mean, even if you're just using a raw, like, locally hosted Jupyter notebook or a Google Colab, you have to add a lot of boilerplate just to write SQL, right? So, like, suddenly, like, the one language that is not like it doesn't seem like you're welcome within a Jupyter notebook from the get-go. But I'd say, like, for folks who are just trying to make that jump, something hosted, like, whether or not it's Hyperquery, just something hosted, period, first of all, just lowers the barrier entry substantially. So we'll just make it a lot easier for you to just get started writing a little bit of code, and that will remove a lot of the, I mean, so I don't know if you guys have ever set up Python yourselves, but, like, there's just, like, this mess of, you need to install the right libraries with the right versions. You need to set up a virtual environment. Like, there's, like, a level of, like, 4 or 5 concepts that you have to learn in order to just get started writing, like, one, like, print statement. And then that's not even to mention, like, how do you connect that to, like, your warehouse? So it's like this horrendous, like, this rift. The learning curve is just like a huge wall to move from just the SQL world and the BI world into Python. So yeah, I'd say, like, hosted tools tend to lower this barrier to entry just massively, right? So just because Jupyter doesn't have native SQL integration, hosted tools will. But Jupyter also makes it pretty hard to manage the environment, whereas hosted tools will usually have a, like, de facto, like, here's a set of libraries that will work together well for you. Yeah, you can customize them later, but let's just start with the default, so you can just write some Python or some R just to get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I switched, so I guess the audio quality issues were back, so I switched to a different mic. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, sounds fine.
Sounds fine.
Okay, well, we'll just roll with this. And the fancy mic, I guess I'll just set to the side for now. Yeah, to your point, like, I will tell you, as someone with a BI background, that for the longest time, if I wanted to try something out, when the first step was like, okay, install Docker, I was like, okay, I'm out, I'm done.
Yeah,
right? Like, this
that's
is
the worst. That's how you lose people.
Yeah, that's sometimes people ask me, why hasn't superset taken off more, and I say it's because BI people can't manage it. They don't. The BI departments don't have the skills, right? They just don't.
Yeah. That's
So
such a good point. Like, asking I mean, I never thought about it that way, but, like, going from start playing with the BI tool to self-hosting your own dashboard tool. Yeah, I can see that being a rift.
Yeah.
So, we got a comment.
We got a comment from Mike. He says people can start with a simple BI tool. Starting with writing code can be daunting. A graduation that's done via need, and everybody loves their own first tool. That's true, right?
Yeah.
You always have fond memories of that first one.
Except for everyone in academia who was on MATLAB. I think everybody there
Everyone hates it.
Hates it. Yeah. So just small asterisk, but I completely agree.
But that's actually brings up an interesting point, which I think there's a real. I don't know if it's still the case in 2023, but you don't have to go back too far where everybody wanted to be a data engineer, right? And maybe now they call you want to be an analyst. I guess suppose now it'd probably be something to do with LLMs and AI, right? But
AI engineer
and
engineer.
ML ops or something like that. But in some ways, I think what a notebook can give you as a BI practitioner, and if you're a BI person watching this, is one of the reasons I'd encourage you to check out Hyperquery, is like if you want to move in that direction, if you're interested in more of the analytics engineering side of things, a lot of BI people don't write code. They might not even write SQL because a lot of BI tools will gen the SQL for you. So they might be able to build very sophisticated models through the UI, but when it comes to actually writing the SQL, they're not familiar with it. And I think a notebook can be, if you're looking to move in the direction of someone who can write SQL and can write Python and do that sort of thing, I think these kind of analytics or BI notebook tools are a good way to move in that direction, but still stay in an environment that has a lot of the things that you're familiar with, that has some of these guardrails that you don't have to understand how to, what a Helm chart is before you can start using your tool. And so that's one of the reasons I would recommend people check that out. And so one of my questions for you in that vein is, when it comes to Hyperquery, do you find are you getting much engagement from kind of pure BI teams, or are these kind of more data science or data engineering or analytics teams?
Versus, and larger and larger small. That's what I was interested in. Whether large or small organizations more interested in this as well, because normally these with new good technology, it's small firms, and then it takes a while to get to that enterprise level. So also on to Ryan's question, are you seeing enterprise interest too, as well as just data teams and BI teams, and so who's adopting it basically?
Yeah, great questions. So I'd say we don't, there's a level of BI analyst that's completely that doesn't know SQL at all. We don't really cater to them particularly well, and we also don't see a lot of them in the app. But from that bar, if you know any SQL at all, even select star, we see everyone all the way downstream into the most technical folks within our app, which is what we were hoping for, right? We wanted to cater to the lowest common denominator, be able to make the barrier to entry extremely, extremely low, so no one gets scared off if you don't know Python or something. But then we still wanted to enable people to have full capabilities to do everything you might want to do in a Jupyter notebook. So obviously, with that said, I think our sweet spot tends to be we tend to target analysts and data scientists, so folks who either know SQL alone or SQL and Python, or even just Python sometimes. And I'd say our app is best catered to that workflow. We built Joseph and I were both career data scientists or analysts, so we built the products just based on our understanding of what that workflow is, and exactly we've catered the entire product to match that workflow, right? But then we still have a lot of folks who are doing ML work, and then a lot of folks who are doing data engineering work, building ad hoc pipelines. And honestly, I don't have a strong opinion. ML, I think makes sense, but for data engineering, I'm still I don't know. I'm a little bit disconcerted, because I'm you're running this pipeline and scheduling it every day, and it seems to be productionized, but this is a notebook, right? Maybe that's okay. Maybe I'm just I should be accepting this is a hardened legitimate use case. But in the beginning, I was I would, people would tell me they're doing this, and I'd be like, no, don't. You need to put that into DBT. What are you doing? You're gonna support as much as I want you to keep using our product, please stop. And then to answer Eric's question, I think on the startup all the way up to the enterprise level, we've very intentionally avoided all enterprise contact, because we realized very quickly that procurement process is very long, so that was already a barrier. But then secondly, like oh my god, they just want like so many security things. So we still get quite large customers. I think the value of Hyperquery will go up as a company gets bigger. So like people are even willing to just accept that we're not doing all the like we're not cloud prem, we're not self-hosted or anything like that. But people are still willing to accept the small flex on security in the same way like they do against Snowflake, and then still use our product. But we have companies that basically just range all the way up. This is embarrassing, but I don't do a lot of analytics on our data. So I can't exactly tell you the breakdown. But if I just were to, I mean, I can't even like, I can't synthesize the data. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry about it. You know, I for a long time, I was in consulting for a long time, and the consulting firms I worked at, we were always building these data warehouses and complex systems, and then we were running the firm on a spreadsheet, right?
Yep, exactly. Sending Excel sheets around,
sending
emailing spreadsheets,
Excel sheets to one
another. Not even editing the same sheet at the same time, just emailing around. It's like, well,
that's right. So we don't use spreadsheets. We still use our product. It's just I don't do that much of analytics. I mean, I'm like a tenth of an analyst right now, so I just get more stuff done.
So we got a bunch of good questions in. Great. So I'm just going to knock a few of them out. So we're going to start, of course, with Ryan Gesh. Thank you for the I don't even know what you call these. And cool. what are these even called on YouTube?
What's the lingo for this?
Super chat. It used to be called a super chat. I mean, we don't get these, so like we don't have to talk about them. But we got one today. So
yeah, that's awesome.
So Ryan, thank you so much for the very generous donation and contributing. You know, maybe I'm going to have to buy a new mic after this episode. We don't know.
Who knows?
So thank you for the very generous contribution to the Super Data Brothers show there. So first a comment from friend of the show Miko Yuck. She just says, "Good old MATLAB, PTSD of sitting in the MATLAB room in college." So.
Yeah.
If you ever run into Miko, if you want to hear some crazy analytics stories, and you run across Miko at a conference, she's got some doozies to share. So hit her up for that. Okay, so we've got a number of good questions from David Pidsley. So David is actually a Gartner analyst. We're talking about enterprise earlier. So David is a Gartner analyst, does really good research. He just came out with a very interesting bit of research about kind of the BI applications for generative AI, and like what breaking it into personas, and then what experiences vendors should consider providing for each persona. So that's a really cool piece of research. So he asked a couple of good questions. So we'll run through them all, just kind of rapid fire them here, and see what you think. So the first one, does every dashboard need a notepad or somewhere? Should you get in the habit of making it easy to find for end users or consumers why you built what you built, what the definitions are, and what your assumptions were? Whether it's a dashboard or a notebook, do you think this should be a best practice everyone should be in?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I as much as I like, I can tell you what people are doing within Hyperquery. It's I don't have a strong opinion on this one. So we have a lot of users who are doing this exact thing. Like they're basically using us not just as a notebook, but as a documentation platform. So it makes a lot of sense. Like you put your analyses in here, and then you also document all assets here. So it becomes a central source of truth for finding all data knowledge. And one of the use cases is like they'll embed a dashboard from Tableau or something, and then they'll write a bunch of documentation about it, or even add the source queries or something like that to do a little bit of an exploration if you want to learn more about the origin, the provenance of the dashboard. I'm still like unconvinced that that's the correct long-term path. I go back and forth between that. I mean, obviously, yeah, you can do that, but it's a lot of maintenance work, and it's also a lot of like this thing isn't it lives in Hyperquery, but it's not like directly attached to the dashboard. So like dashboard gets deprecated, you have to remember there's a lot of friction there just to there's always a lot of friction to maintain documentation, right? Ideally, like I can see a world where like if if you could do some of this documentation within, say, like the DBT semantic layer or something, or whatever like underpins your BI tool later, that might be a better, like more proximate location where people might more naturally look. And then that could be a bit more helpful for, or like directly on the dashboard itself, you could just add like a page with some text. Honestly, to me, that feels like it's more proximate. Sorry, now I'm going to stare off into the distance as I think about like whether I'm like churning all of our users off of our platform or yeah.
No,
So I don't
think,
know. I don't know. Yeah, I think you definitely have to have some sort of documentation. But
I actually think it's an interesting testament to the flexibility of notebooks. And the thing there is, when you mention that in Hyperquery, people are producing notebooks or documents that are purely for documentation or explanation, right?
yeah,
You know, you would never, I've never seen it done, that you would go into Power BI and open and create a new dashboard. And what you would put in that dashboard is a big text box telling you like something about some process you did, right? Like you would never use a dashboarding tool for that. And that gets to kind of the, in a way, the narrative capabilities of a notebook compared to a dashboard, that you would create a new notebook that's purpose, it actually doesn't display any data. Its purpose is only to convey a narrative.
yeah, that's correct.
Correct. You would never do that with a dashboarding tool. So then another comment from David, just in general, do you see data science and BI teams, is there like a convergence going on here? Do you see the Venn diagram of tools that one uses versus tools that the other use? Are these moving towards one another at this point?
My God, this is like the question of the decade. I should be a little bit more opinionated here, but I don't know. Like I feel like, I think all of us have been just holding our breath waiting for DBT. And they just launched their semantic layer, so I haven't played around with it. Or like Malloy, I don't know, something. We're waiting for some sort of like middleware infrastructure layer to like sort of sit under. But once you, sorry, this is I'm gonna like this is all gonna make sense in a second. But the reason why we care about that is because like traditionally, I think there are notebooking tools or like tools that have tried to become BI tools too. But a really great BI tool like Tableau. Okay, this is not. I'm not saying that Tableau is a great BI tool, but like really like fully capable BI tools have like some sort of semantic layer, right? They have some sort of way to harden your stuff as code. And okay, just as an example, like if Hyperquery were to go into the BI world, I would feel right now in the current state of things, like I would feel a little bit uneasy because I know people are building dashboards within Hyperquery, but at some point, like you want that dashboard to live in a place where the code is hardened and it's like a robust, reliable dashboard. And like notebooks, just to be frank, are like an analysis / prototyping tool, right? So you can create great narratives, point in time analyses, but or rough explorations. But creating something that's productionized is just not set up in a way to deal with all the things that are going to happen after you productionize it, right? So I see this vision. I just think that like we need something underneath to like bridge those two use cases. And like just to be fair, like BI teams also have a lot of like I'm not a natural like BI person. I don't have a lot of like strong user empathy there. So I would also need to like, I think this is a pitfall of a lot of people building these kinds of tools. Like you don't really cross that chasm that often. I would need to really like study this and then see if we can actually address all the needs that are required of somebody in that space. But look, I'm rambling a bit because I just like this is an unsolved problem in my head, and all I have is a nest there, just where an answer should be. I think my short answer to this is like if you put a gun to my head, I think they should work in the same tool within like 4 years. 2 years feels a little bit short, but it feels it just doesn't it like it's just weird to me that like two people that are doing fundamentally quite similar things work in like completely different tools,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it also speaks to the like inability to go from, like we talked earlier about how like it's so hard to go from SQL into Python, right? Or like to Cossack. Like that also shouldn't be the case. Like you should make it very simple for somebody to be like, all right, I'm doing BI work, I'm getting more familiar with data. Oh, why don't I just try some Python? And like I think there's definitely movement in the world to make that easier, but I think having a consolidation of tooling would also help a lot. So A, I want it to happen, but also B, I think it should happen. Whether it will happen is another question.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's been it's one of those things that seems like a good idea, and yet nobody has cracked it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So then this. It's just a comment from David, and then one more question. So the analytics team is just rarely has analytics about the use of their content, and that's that was my experience. If you go back now 6 years, Eric and I worked on tried to build kind of analytics for your analytics to go out to analytics teams and say, you have no idea who's using your reports. You don't know what's useful and what's not. Like this will help you up your game, and we couldn't sell it to anybody. It was like, there was just people were interested in it, but when it came time to write the check, there was nobody willing to approve writing the check. And so I think that, like analytics teams, I would challenge you. There's this big wave of product thinking in data right now, and the idea of data as a product, and maybe you should get out of the idea of building data sets or building reports, and instead think about building data products and that sort of thing. And nobody. People who are building products have information about who is using their products and how and for what, right? So, I mean, if you're trying to do data as a product and you don't know this, like, you're not doing it right, is one thing I would say. And then final question from David. So let's talk about the end users. We haven't really gotten into the collaborative experience of notebooks at all. But I think it's an important thing to touch on, and we've got about 10 minutes left here. And thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation. But let's just talk about that. So, who collaborates in notebooks and how? Is this strictly collaboration as far as the analytics team or the data producers, or can consumers collaborate in a notebook as well?
Yeah, this is a great question, and the answer is both. And this was a really difficult thing for us to unlock. So yeah, two primary use cases. We'll often see people like pair program. So often of the people that we've talked to, it's frequently like a senior analyst with a junior one, and like kind of trying to work through some problem together. But we've also seen people, and this behavior I just love. It's like you see people go in with their stakeholders. And the stakeholders, you'll like start writing a spec, like a design spec for what you're trying to do. And you'll multiplayer that together. You'll like write it out. You'll maybe write a couple queries. And so it becomes this like this interface over which you can do this collaboration with non-technical folks. And that, I mean, just like as a final point there, like that was, so we had hosted Jupyter notebooks at Airbnb. And we had something called Knowledge Repo, which is where you could like publish work to like through GitHub into a repository where people could find it. And our, I believe our Jupyter notebooks were, I don't know if they were, no, I think they were multiplayer to some extent, like to some like rudimentary extent. But the issue was like, Jupyter is so scary that nobody ever came in. So like you just never find out that it's multiplayer or collaborative.
Right.
So like there was this weird, and once you published it, it was still like scary such that like people didn't, non-technical folks never really read that work. So there was this very big wall. So yes, consumers absolutely collaborated in our notebook, but it was like a difficult thing to figure out how to get them to be comfortable enough to do that.
Yeah, and the way it works, for anybody who's curious, and you can, correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of these notebook tools, and I'm assuming Hyperquery works this way too, is like it is kind of a, multiple people, like you can have a shared session essentially. So 3 of us are in there at once. I'm writing SQL, Eric's writing Python, you're building visualizations, and like it's not, we don't have to manage some check-in, check-out process, and we're not overwriting one another's work. Like this is all happening in a shared environment.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep,
and that's
exactly.
what makes it so cool. Like that's what. So one of the reasons I really I advocate that teams, even if you're a BI team, and a lot of you in our audience are BI people, maybe at enterprise BI teams where you're not. I think this, even if I would look to adopt a notebook solution for your team, even if you have no near or medium term intention of introducing the concept of notebooks to your end users, because you can be so much more productive working together, pair programming, ideating in a notebook. I mean, you don't go to Power BI to do your ideation, right? That's where you assemble your final product.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Cool. So I'll just share this from David real quick. Julian Sun, another Gartner analyst who I know who does good work. 50% of organizations will evaluate analytics and data science machine learning platforms as an all-in-one due to market convergence. And this is something, obviously Gartner's audience is the biggest, most complex enterprises, but this is definitely something, if you look at the overall analytics space, there's definitely and in the BI market in particular, look at what Microsoft's doing with Fabric. They're really moving in the direction of a pretty compelling all-in-one platform. Yeah. Now you got to go all in on Microsoft, right? Like you've got to be willing to put all your chips in a single vendor.
I've used Power BI. It's okay, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it does what it does, and it does it well, and it does it. It's perceived as being free. Whether or not that's the case is another story. Microsoft didn't get to be one of the biggest companies on earth by giving away stuff for free. I'll just tell you that. So here's a challenge, not to put you on the spot, but Chief Data Officer, sell me notebooks for BI in 3 words.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's 3 words right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I suppose I'd say like usable, collaborative, and powerful. So I think that covers. This is wide. I'm basically like, this is a skill tree. I'm now going in every direction, but that roughly covers it.
Yeah. All right. So we're approaching the. I almost said top of the hour, but we shifted the show back a half hour today.
Thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah, no problem.
Glad to.
I was happy to do it. Cool. So I want to thank you once again for joining us. This was a great conversation. I always try to end, and we don't have a ton of time, but if you had a piece of advice for someone who's looking to break into data at this point in 2023, what would that be? What would you tell a young person who's interested in this and wants to take a step in this direction career-wise?
Oh, great question. I've written a blog post on this, but I just say, and I've said this multiple times, just be curious. I think curiosity, like throughout my entire career, has been the single greatest driving factor to me figuring things out. I mean, I think for you guys, if I can just sort of glean from the things that you talk about, you as well, it just fills you into needs all over the place, right? But yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally how data works, right? If you're not curious, you're just wading through data trash, right? But if you're curious, you're dumpster diving. You might find something actually quite amazing, and then having genuine interest in that can propel you quite far.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. All right, where can people keep up with you?
Oh yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm not super active on those, but I do write a Substack called Win with Data, so you can find me there. It's win.hyperquery.ai. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I've read quite a few of your blog posts. I think they're pretty insightful. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show, Robert.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. That wraps up another episode of the Super Data Brothers Super Data Show.
Yeah.
Couple points of order, just to wrap up here. So first of all, just a reminder: meet the Super Data Brothers, DBT Coalesce, October 16th through 19th. I will be at that one solo, and then Data Day Texas, January 27th. That's a one-day conference. It is one of the coolest data conferences there is. If you are interested in meeting like a lot of the top data thinkers or data influencers out there, many of them will be at this conference. I'm not counting us in that group, but many much more impressive people will be at the conference for you to come and meet. And I mean, it's just an awesome session. So check out Data Day Texas, January 27th, 2024. And if you do want to attend Data Day Texas, register with code Super Data Brothers to get 20% off of your registration. And then the final thing, just a quick shout out to end the show to symphonyanalytics.io. You know, we talked a lot about kind of the BI, UI, and BI experience. And one of the things that a lot of BI tools are missing is kind of the ability to easily collaborate and tell meaningful stories and build meaningful presentations. There's too much screenshotting and dumping to PowerPoint. And that's one of the primary problems that Symphony solves for you. It gives you a place to do that and to combine assets from multiple BI tools into one. So check out symphonyanalytics.io. We're big fans of theirs. We interviewed Michael from Symphony a few episodes back. So dig into the archives if you're curious to get a deep dive on what they're all about. All right. Anything, any last words for the people, Eric?
No, I think that's about it. Why don't you tell them about our guest next week?
Yeah. So next week, we have Laura Ludwig. So I'm actually really excited for this. Laura posts awesome stuff on LinkedIn, and we're going to be talking about kind of how to build a data career and data around data storytelling, right? And so this is really going to be how to communicate in a way that actually moves the needle type of presentation, which I think we could all kind of perpetually update our information on, right? It's just one of those topics. It changes over time, and you always want to be on top of your data storytelling game. So really excited to have Laura on next week. And then the week after that, we do not have a guest. We're going to be doing a show about how to prioritize data requests. The Super Data Brothers method for figuring out, of these 100 things I just got asked, I can only do 7. Which 7 should I do? That is coming up the week after. So, all right. That's it. All right. Well, take care, everybody. And until next week, I'm Ryan.
And I am Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye.